drones. So I appreciate your guys' service. So we're here to talk about Harry Beasley, though. Harry Beasley, just give you some of his history before he went in the Navy. He was born in Indiana. Everything he puts, so if you look on his draft card for World War I, everything, you'll put Newark, but he wasn't born in Newark. He was born in Indiana. His family moved here sometime between the 1900 and the 1910 census. He was born in 1889. He enlists in the Navy in 1910. He's stationed on various ships, and then he's eventually stationed on USS Florida. If you turn it, I gave that little packet. Just a little, that second page there, about 6 months ago, somebody brought me in his scrapbook. It's in private hands. He bought it at an auction, and with all these postcards and photos of Harry Beasley. So that's his writing. You'll see in that top photo, he's got his haircut, so he may take off his hat and how dirty it is, but that's Harry there on the far right. And then at the bottom is the USS. He's got an expert rifle team from the Florida. Harry Beasley was an expert marksman. So they're on the USS Florida when trouble starts in Mexico. If you read about this, it's the most bizarre thing in the world. Okay, some Blue Jackets had gone into Veracruz. They were detained by the Mexican authorities, but then released. The commander of the Navy down there said, okay, here's what, you've insulted us, so what we want you to do is you have to apologize and you have to fire a 21-gun salute to the American flag. Mexican authorities said, no, we're not doing that. So then it got bumped up to President Wilson. President Wilson and the President of Mexico had this long-standing little feud. And if you know anything about Wilson, Wilson's a pacifist. So, but some reason he's got his bird up his butt, seriously on this. I mean, he goes after this Mexican president, and he's looking for any reason pretty much to start some trouble down here. Well, then they find out that there's an arms shipment coming into Veracruz. Wilson gets on that and he says, okay, we're going to stop that arms shipment. So that's really what started this whole thing. It was just basically an insult. Two politicians, just neither one of them wanted to budge on anything. And then they find out this arms shipment is going into Veracruz. So Wilson says, okay, move in. He doesn't even get an act of Congress or anything. He says, go. The USS Florida is one of 3 ships that are sent there. So when they get off, there's a map there of Veracruz. Okay? They get off. The Mexicans have their army, what army they have, and they've also started, they empty the prisons, they've armed the prisoners, they've armed civilians. They're on rooftops, they're all along here. Now, the target for the Navy personnel that took the beach, basically, was that custom house. That's where they were headed. So, I've got a circle there and a little mark about where they took off. If you read incidences of this, they get a little bit different, because I assume nobody's sitting around jotting down the history a lot, okay? So that you're getting all these recollections. So the sailors and some Marines, they take a couple buildings, the Mexicans open fire, they shoot one Marine on top of one building. So I mean, this is a hectic place for right now. There's a machine gun posted in the hotel that's circled, and then there's a machine gun in an alley. The commander asked for volunteers to take the machine gun in the alley. Harry Beasley and 5 other guys volunteer to go up this alley. The paper described it as like a narrow canyon. This is one newspaper account. They dashed up the narrow canyon-like alley out of which the death-dealing machine gun was belching forth a stream of shot. They kept well to the walls to be out of range of the bullets. Before they reached the gun, one of the men was mown down by the enemy. They reached the gun where they were joined by a detachment of Americans who had attacked the body of Mexicans from the rear. So the gun was silenced and the Mexicans taken prisoner. Another witness of it said, in the alley they came under fire from the custom house and from a machine gun in the second-story window of the Hotel Orient. Lowry, who was the commander, ordered his men to fire on the machine gun, and in exchange 2 Blue Jackets were wounded, 1 mortally. Lowry was nearly killed when a bullet struck the bottom of his cab. Then a Mexican policeman tumbled from the window and the machine gun fell silent. Lowry's men continued down the alley to the custom house, breaking a window and climbing through inside. The custom officials laid down their weapons. So there's a photo in there from that photo collection of a Mexican machine gunner, and written on it is they made it hot for us. So I'm assuming that that was a postcard that he found of a Mexican machine gunner and sent it home to Mom and said, this is kind of what happened. The Advocate picked up the story, the local paper, and they ran an article on June 26, 1914. It's the spirit and bravery and self-sacrifice which permeated the mind of Harry Beasley of Newark when he was getting ready for the Battle of Vera Cruz, for which he received a medal for special bravery, is shown in a letter written to his father, Charles Beasley, just before the battle. His first thought was for his mother, and he asked that she not be told of the danger he was going into. Things here are very bad, he wrote. They are sending our field guns ashore now, and we may go at any time. Now, Father, I have a Howard watch I gave $65 for when on the USS Scorpion. If I never come back home, I want you to keep my watch as yours and wear it. The chain is the one Mother and you gave me. I've loved you all, and I've always tried to do the right goodbye. So later, then he sends a message home, and he says, we got through it okay. So for his actions that day, and for the others' actions, there were actually 11 men off the USS Florida that received the Medal of Honor. They were also given, along with the Medal of Honor in those days, a $100 gratuity, which in about today's money is about $3,000. Right. So, but they weren't given what the current Medal of Honors were given. The President, the citation reads that the President of the United States, in the name of Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Medal of Honor to Seaman Harry C. Beasley, United States Navy, for extraordinary heroism in the line of his possession on board the USS Florida during the seizure of Vera Cruz, Mexico, April 21st, 1914. Soon after this, Harry gets out of service. He comes back here, he works around Newark. Then when World War I starts, he re-enlists in the Navy. Now they're not going to send a Medal of Honor awardee out on a ship. So they actually sent him to Philadelphia and Pennsylvania to, it was a post office, basically clearinghouse for the Navy, and that's where they set him up. While he was there though, our first casualty of World War I was a man named Seaman Archie Leedy, who died on the USS Jacob Jones. It was torpedoed by the Germans. He was missing in action. He's still considered missing in action. His body's never been retrieved. The USS Jacob Jones, in fact, was just discovered in August of last year. So we don't know if they're going to go down and try to retrieve any bodies. But actually, the first word of anybody knowing anything that happened to Leedy came through Beasley, because he ran into somebody in the post office there in Philadelphia so he could let his family know. He serves his time in the Navy there during World War II. After the war ends in 1918, he's discharged in 1919. He returns to Newark, where he becomes a police officer here. So on June 30th, 1931, he was doing a night duty. He came on duty about 6, and he was running until about 2 in the morning. There had been a string of safe robberies in Newark. Of course, they were walking a beat at that time. Newark had a lot of stores downtown. He was around the square. You gotta go down there. Mm-hmm. Okay. He was around the square, and he heard something. This is the way it goes. He went down an alley. When he came out the alley, there was at that time a private alley that ran east and west. When he came around there was a car sitting there with its headlights right in his eyes. I don't know how many feet away. I can't remember, but it was a little ways away. But he couldn't see. Immediately it says somebody started firing at him. So what ended up happening is he was shot twice, once in the chest that went through, hit his spine, he came out, and once in the foot. He did manage to get 6 shots off, didn't hit anybody. Then the people dropped the safe and took off. He survived. He lived for about 24 hours. He did give some statements. Couldn't see anything because of the headlights in his face, so he couldn't really give much information. Then he passed away. On the back of your photo is a photo of the funeral. It was held up at Cedar Hill. It was a military funeral, of course, and a peace officer funeral. The governor of Ohio was here for that. It was a rather large affair. You can see his wife is accompanied by the minister behind in a black dress. That's his wife, Mrs. Beasley. They never had any children. Mrs. Beasley thought that Harry had been set up. She thought it was a murder. They never found, they talked to witnesses or suspects afterwards. They never really found anybody that ever knew anything. They had to clear, no fingerprints matched on the safe to the people they did talk to. I've heard different detectives talk about it since then, that said, in the years that followed, somebody said that somebody in jail kind of said that somebody did this, that sort of chain reaction, this guy did this. They tried to blame the Zanesville police, said that may have had something to do with them, because there were some New York safes found down behind the Zanesville police office. So, it's one of those things that, of course, his file is gone, all the evidence is gone, nobody knows where it is. Because I think every New York police detective would love to solve the case of who shot and killed Harry Beasley. But like I say, he was one of our Medal of Honor awardees. Most of the other ones were all from the Civil War. But he's probably the most well-known here in the county for his service. And we're lucky to have some of those photos and that of him. That photo that's on the cover, that was taken much later. I would say probably soon before he died in the 30s or late 20s. So I know some of you talked about, your eye for detail. I never could, things are crooked and things. So I have a phone that was taken here in town because there's a police photo, or a photo of him in this police officer's uniform that looks to me like it was taken the exact same time. So I think those were something that he did here local for the family or something, so. Does anybody have any questions or comments or?
What's the story behind the photo of him on the horse?
We don't know, and the little, he obviously just liked, that was in somebody's photos, he must have liked dressing up as a cowboy. There's stories that the boy he's roping, there is his illegitimate son. Just the things that go around town, every town's got it, so, but those are just two photos, that we found at some point, and, I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
You like the rope and ride, I guess.
Yeah.
And that is his actual Medal of Honor, correct?
I believe so.
We have nothing to dispute it.
Yeah,
We
we
were told
have-
it was donated by his family to the police department, and, no one's.
Yeah, I would say those are his actual medals, because he had no family, he had a couple of brothers, but I would assume that his wife made sure that you guys had his medal.
And another thing I heard too that is interesting, that you'll be able to shed more light on this, it wasn't his beat he was walking, right? Wasn't he covering for someone that night?
I haven't read that.
Okay.
I don't know that.
Sure, that could just be rumor mill. There's a lot of rumor mills that go around, it's prohibition times,
Right.
Cops are just as crooked as the rum runners, so.
Yeah, there's a local story that, there's a couple other stories, like, there's a story that Advocate ran because, they didn't have Facebook, so they put everything in the paper, there was a snapping turtle walking across the square, and Beasley had to rescue everybody from the snapping turtle, and then there's stories that, he'd walk his beat, go to different bars, and he had his own bottle of whiskey under the, he just pour himself a drink, take a shot, and keep on walking, so, there's all sorts of different stories, The man's gone, we can't,
Right.
help him or anything else, but that sounds like, I think that was him. He was a special person, had great notoriety in town, so I'm sure he got a lot of special privilege, for who he was, so. I think he was a character.
Probably. All right. Cool. Anything else?